Hey, Browns fans, welcome on in to the Dog Check podcast, part of the Bleav network of podcasts, and of course, airing weekly on Bally Sports Cleveland. Appreciate you guys coming on by after what has been obviously we'll call it an eventful week so far, heading into week 2 for the Cleveland Browns, just with everything going on with after the loss to the Cowboys. There's some new stuff with the quarterback. It's just hot and heavy over here in Cleveland. But in the meantime, there is a game to prepare for, and we are excited this week to be joined by Bucky Brooks, who's the host of Bleav and Jaguars here on the Bleav network. Obviously a former NFL player himself and does work with the NFL network. Bucky, I appreciate you giving us some time this week, my man. Can't thank you enough for carving out some time for us here on the Dog Check.
Hey, man, thanks for having me on. It should be a lot of fun.
No doubt about it. And we know it's a big game this weekend in that both teams obviously started the season 0-1. And so they're both kind of looking to get up off the floor a little bit here and get that first win of the season. We know the numbers for teams that start 0-2 and in terms of the odds to make the playoffs. So this one feels pretty important for these two teams. From your bird's eye view, we know you were obviously doing your stuff with the Jaguars this weekend, but what you've been able to already sort of surmise from the Browns-Cowboys games, what is your perspective on this team after week 1 of the season?
Well, one, I would say don't panic so soon. It's the first game of the season. And the biggest improvement most teams makes from week 1 to week 2, depending on your strategy when it comes to the preseason. It's the first time guys have played significant minutes and played together. Chemistry and continuity matters. And if you don't have that developed in the preseason, you have to then kind of orchestrate and navigate that part in the regular season. While there's some concern about the quarterback and Deshaun Watson and not playing like many expected him to play, I think you have to also understand new offensive coordinator, new system. Everyone is trying to kind of put it together. If Kevin Stefanski's calling plays on a system that's different than his preferred system, it's like learning a foreign language. And so everyone is kind of in learning mode. That's why I would say Cleveland fans kind of need to pump the brakes on putting the red button. It's early. You're only one game into the season.
That is a good point. And I will say, like, I'm trying to sort of use that context that you bring up when I sort of talk about how this game went this weekend. It didn't look good. It didn't look pretty. We could obviously all understand that. And there are some concerning things, but the key now is that they don't turn into habits. They just are sort of a one-off where they can keep going from here. In relation to maybe just building the chemistry that they didn't get in the preseason, and I always like to say I think the first couple weeks of the season have become almost an extension of the preseason in that way. How many weeks do you think it kind of takes for teams to totally finally kind of get into sync on both sides of the ball when we know they have limited reps and snaps in the new version of the preseason where you only get the 3 games?
Yeah, you like to think it takes the first quarter of the season before everyone kind of settles in and you figure out what you have. As coaches, it takes about those first 4 games to kind of figure out some of the things that you thought you were going to be able to do prior to the season. You find out those are not a reality with the team that you have, and you have to kind of continue to make adjustments on the fly. That's why the best teams are always adjusting and always tweaking their processes and systems to give them the best chance to play your best ball down the stretch. And even though I pointed to 4 games, it may take 8 games for you to figure out who your team is and how you have to play with the team that you have. The best coaches figured it out right around the midway point, and you see their teams go into the playoffs with a lot of momentum and energy. I think Kevin Stefanski is still in the exploratory phase in terms of exploring what his players can do, trying to figure out, okay, this guy can do this well, but this one does something else well. And then when you get to the mid-stretch, like right around the halfway mark, you begin to implement those things that really can help your team win because you're putting everybody individually in the best position for them to win their individual battles.
You made some good points on just, again, the context of the situation Cleveland's in right now, a new offense, Kevin Stefanski calling plays for an offense that is somewhat his, but also has new elements kind of involved in it, and the kind of adjustment period that comes with that. We didn't even mention yet the offensive line struggles that we saw in week 1 and how that group doesn't have a lot of meaningful reps together yet, and so they're kind of feeling some things out. But your overall but Deshaun was obviously part of the struggles in week 1 too. He had some issues. What is your just perspective on I guess both his play in week one from your perspective, but also just where he's at as a player at this point in his career. Because all of us in Cleveland, Bucky, we keep sitting here, man, and we keep holding that hope like, well, hey, that 2020 Deshaun Watson's in there somewhere. It's in there somewhere. And this offense is supposed to pull that out of him finally. But we keep playing this game of saying that, and it just seems like we're not any closer to actually seeing that version of him. So just what's your perspective on everything as it pertains to Deshaun and how he's seeing the game right now?
So there are a few different things at play when it comes to Deshaun that has prevented him from being that player that we saw his last season when he participated with the Houston Texans, the year that they were 4-12, but he was 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. And so I would say it's 3 things: skills, scheme, and swagger. He has seen a decline.
We'll call it the 3 S's. We can call it the 3 S's. I like that.
There's been a decline in each of those areas, and we didn't anticipate him falling off the cliff like he has. What we have to remember is every time you miss a game, every time you're not on the practice field, your skills are kind of use it or lose it. And for Deshaun Watson, he had to hold out at the end of his Houston tenure, so that took him away from the field for a year. He missed 10 games with a suspension. That's the second year. And then last year he gets back, but he misses most of the season with an injury. So over the course of those 3 years, he hasn't been able to continue to develop his skills. He goes from one scheme in Houston to another scheme in Cleveland to another scheme this season. So he hasn't settled in and kind of figured out the best way to play within the system. And the coaches haven't figured out the best way to get him up and going. And then I'll say this: the swagger's all gone from Deshaun Watson. He may put up some false bravado, but he's not the same confident player that he was in Houston. And no matter what we may say about him, and no matter what people may say about the off-field stuff or whatever, but what has happened when you are a player and you start hearing the outside noise, it impacts you in some way. And I can say, in watching him from the time he was in high school and watching him at Clemson, whatever, he was always hailed as the hometown hero. He was always celebrated for being the quote unquote good guy and the great player in this. This is the first time that he's ever been the villain. And everybody doesn't play the role of the villain well. It's very similar to when LeBron James left Cleveland and went to Miami. He tried to be the villain and wear black and the black nose mask and all that, but that's not who he is. And so for Deshaun Watson to play at his best, he has to be the happy-go-lucky version of Deshaun Watson. And he hasn't been able to be that because of the cloud of all of the stuff that's hanging over him for the past 3 years has not allowed him to be the best version of himself as a person. So he can't be that as a player.
I love that you bring up the LeBron example, because I've cited that throughout the offseason, the last couple of years since he got here, and just seeing him and his demeanor with things. I think you're 100% right, man. Like he was adored in Houston. I mean, you hear all the stories about the stuff he did in the community. He gave his paycheck to, the workers in the team facility. I remember that was a big story. And there was all these other things just about the good he did in that community. And then it was all gone with the off the field accusations that were put on him. And he comes to Cleveland and he's basically just a hired gun here. There's no connection here in Cleveland to the fan base other than you're the Cleveland Browns quarterback now. We're paying you to do this job. And so I think you're right. Like, I just don't know that he's handled that role well. And it's funny because you bring up a false vibrato too, that he's kind of had. During training camp, he had that sort of lightning rod quote about, I'm done listening to what people were saying about me. It was very, profanity laced and all that. And I get what he's saying, but I always just believe like these guys have a harder time blocking out they always talk about, we don't pay attention to the outside noise. I think a lot of these guys have a lot of trouble doing that, more so than they probably give off or say publicly that they actually do. Because I think in some capacity you hear, whether it's a friend sending you a text or a family member sending you a text, I think eventually this stuff always gets back to you. And I do think that's weighed on him over these last couple of years.
Absolutely, because you got to remember, this is a guy that has always been adored. You brought it up. He has always been adored, from where he grew up to Little Town in Georgia, to the way he has been celebrated at Clemson, to the way that he arrived in H-Town and put it down for the Texans for a while. He has always been celebrated and always been liked. And I think it is hard for him to walk out the door and to feel the reaction that everyone doesn't love and adore him. And I think it even exists despite his efforts to try and be connected with the community and to try to do charitable things in Cleveland. it hasn't been received the way everything else was received prior to, I would say, that moment when all of the allegations changed the way people perceived him to be as a person. That is hard to deal with. And so at some point, he is going to have to kind of like come to the realization that like, hey man, everyone is not going to like me, but I got to be me. I got to go out and play. I got to perform amidst all that other stuff. And the only thing that can really stem the tide is his performance and the production. And once he gets to that point, he can do it. Because the one thing that we do know about sports and we know about the sporting public is like, for all the people that hate him, when the conversation turns is when you play at a high level. And we can talk about Kobe Bryant in that vein. Like all of the stuff that happened to Kobe, all of the stuff that took place in Colorado when he had to deal with the allegations and all of that other stuff. Like, look, he was the villain. But what changed Kobe from being the villain to being celebrated prior to his death was he played and performed at a high level. So once Deshaun Watson puts everything into the preparation, the performance, and the production, Cleveland will change and they will celebrate him. But he has to make that happen by doing the work before they love him. Then the rest of the dog pound will eventually love him.
Yeah, I think that's been part of the problem too. Is like I think last year especially, he wanted it all back on like one throw here, then one throw there. It was like, if I make this throw, it'll change everything. And it's like, nah, man. Like it's a process. Like I think it's a healing process for a lot of people. Along those lines, Bucky, in the way that you're talking, I'm led to believe that you think that's still possible for him. Like you still think he can get back to playing at this game at a high level.
I mean, I think it's possible, but a lot of things have to go into place. I mean, it's been a long time since he's been that high level player. You're talking about 2020. 3 years is a lifetime in the National Football League.
Yeah.
Now, he can bring it back, but I think, one, he has to accept where he is, right? And he has to have enough humility to be able to accept the way that I'm playing is not good enough. Two, the coaching staff and everyone in the building has to take him where he is, not where he was, but where he is. And they have to build game plans around the player that he is right now. And then he has to put a premium on, my job is to win games. No matter what it looks like, if I win games, all of that other stuff can be forgiven. And the other stuff that Cleveland has to understand, Deshaun Watson is going to be your quarterback for the next 2 to 3 years. And so for everyone who hates him for all of the other stuff, it really doesn't matter because he is going to be the quarterback because the money makes it where they can't get rid of him. And so fans and everybody have to make a decision. We can keep killing him knowing that he hears all the noise, or at some point when he runs out the stadium, we're gonna have to support him. And so as much as it's him, it's also the fan base. He has to give them something, but the fan base also has to meet him halfway if they want him to play. Like sometimes you got to support him even through the muck so he can get to the other side.
Bucky Brooks with some great insight into the Deshaun Watson situation here on the Dog Check podcast this week. Again, he is a host for Bleav in Jaguars, obviously does work with the NFL Network, broadcasting analyst for the Jaguars broadcast. So insightful. And I do want to pick his brain here coming up more into the matchup coming up this weekend in week 2. In relation to the Browns, Bucky, as we get ready for this game, I'm curious, like we in Cleveland think Kevin Stefanski is a hell of a coach, really good offensive mind. And we saw that, I think, on full display last year with the way he was able to navigate, 4, then ultimately 5 different quarterbacks that they started for them last season, get to the playoffs and show that they have, changed the culture in Cleveland. How is Kevin Stefanski perceived, though, elsewhere in the NFL, like around the league? Because we see like the 2-time coach of the year, and we're like, yeah, he must be respected. But I don't know if he's held in the same esteem as like the Sean McVays in terms of offensive minds and the Kyle Shanahans in terms of offensive minds.
I think people believe he's a really good coach. I think they respect what he's been able to do in Cleveland. The fact he's been to the playoffs, he's a 2-time coach of the year. He's done it with a bunch of different quarterbacks. You think about the work that he did with Baker Mayfield and where Baker was prior to him getting there, and the fact that they were able to win with Baker as a quarterback, and then they move on, and they were able to win last year with multiple quarterbacks. So I believe that people respect not only his offensive acumen, but his ability to build a team. The thing that you want to see go forward is you want to see them win at a high level in the postseason, because ultimately you're revered for your ability to win the big games in the postseason when the pressure is on. So when he knocks down some of those barriers and they win some of those games in the playoffs, and ultimately if they make it to a Super Bowl, that's when the narrative will really go to the level that it may be in Cleveland regarding him. Look, you don't win 10 plus games in the league by happenstance and just by luck, like rolling the ball out. You have to be able to get on the board and do some X's O's. You have to be able to build a culture that allows your team to flourish. And when I look at the team and I look at the staff and I think about what he was able to do in bringing Jim Schwartz over and how that has been a really good move for the team. He has the chops, and now it's just like Deshaun. They got to continue to win. They got to consistently win and win at a high level for people to understand how good of a coach he really is.
Speaking of the defense and Jim Schwartz, we know that the Jaguars and Browns somewhat familiar with each other because they played late in the season last year in December. Browns obviously coming away with a win in that one. Different situation because Joe Flacco was the quarterback at the time. We know that. What types of challenges does this defense present for Trevor Lawrence and company as they come in, obviously 0-1 on the season, looking to kind of get back in the win column and get things on track?
Very talented team. Very talented at every level. So all three levels, they're blue chip players. You think about Myles Garrett kind of being the straw that stirs the drink, how dominant he is at the point of attack. You think about the playmakers that they have on the perimeter. You talk about Grant Delpit, Denzel Ward, Martin Emerson. I mean, Greg Newsome. They have talent everywhere. JOK at linebacker. So there's no doubt about the blue chip caliber players that are on the defense. Jim Schwartz has made it very, very easy in terms of, look, man, they're going to bring 5. They're going to play man-to-man in the back end. They're going to say that our guys are better than your guys. You can't beat us. And they're going to challenge you for 60 minutes. For the Jaguars, last year, look, they felt like they had opportunities to put points on the board, but couldn't get it done, couldn't make the plays to do it. And then Joe Flacco made enough plays for their offense to push the margin to one where they couldn't come back. This year, it'll be interesting because they feel really good about the wide receiver core. They feel good about Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, BTJ, Brian Thomas Jr., and Gabe Davis. But until you deal with that monster that you have at Myles Garrett up front, it disrupts the timing of the offense. And so how do you handle 95? That is the million-dollar question when it comes to Jacksonville this week.
Obviously, the Jaguars built up a decent lead in that game this weekend against the Dolphins in week 1. They led 17-7 at the half and then went on to not score in the entire second half after that as they lose that one 20-17. Bucky, I'm curious, like, just what went wrong in week 1 for them, especially in that second half that led to them losing that game, and what are some of the things that you thought that they're now taking into week 2 that they felt good about that they can kind of build upon in good trends?
Well, look, I'll tell you the thing that completely flipped the game. They were up 17-17. They had moved the ball all the way down the field. They get the ball to Travis Etienne. He is about to walk into the end zone, and he fumbles.
Yeah.
Ball goes out the end zone. They get the ball back. Next play, first play, they throw a bomb to Tyreek Hill. And I've likened the Miami Dolphins to the Golden State Warriors in the prime of Stephen Curry's career. When Tyreek Hill takes a bomb, it changes the energy in the stadium. And I'll say this, the momentum overwhelmed the Jaguars where they didn't execute to the same level offensively, but they were dominating the game for almost 3 quarters and let it slip. I think the big thing will be what kind of confidence and resilience do they display? Coming on the heels of losing 5 of their last 6 last year, losing the opener the way they did, I would say it's kind of a make or break game for the Jaguars. So there'll be a lot of anxiety. There'll be a lot of angst. There'll be some confidence that they can perform at a high level, but both teams kind of come in understanding that 0-2 is not quite a death sentence, but it appears to be a death sentence when it comes to making the postseason. This is one that I feel like will have a playoff intensity to it, and we'll see which team executes better.
You mentioned earlier Brian Thomas Jr., their rookie wide receiver. He caught a touchdown over the weekend, obviously, in his debut with the Jaguars. What types of challenges does he present for a defense like the Browns? You know their secondary is obviously very good here in Cleveland, but what should we be sort of anticipating with him and how they're going to utilize him in this game?
Well, the Jags' first pick is he's a big play specialist. He was one at LSU last year. At LSU, yeah. He had 17 touchdowns. He picked up where he left off this year. He's gifted. He's talented. He's smooth and fluid, but really he has the speed that you look for in a vertical playmaker. He and Gabe Davis are the big play weapons. And I would say the biggest difference from the Jaguars this year than the version that showed up last year in the dog pound, they have the ability to create the deep ball. They have the ability to create more big plays down the field, which opens up the underneath areas of the offense for Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. Early in the game, look for them to take a shot. If they can connect down the field, it changes the way the Browns have to play, and it opens it up for some of their marquee playmakers, namely Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, and Travis Etienne.
You obviously highlighted Myles Garrett and just the force that he is on the Browns side of things, but I think this Jaguars defensive line doesn't necessarily get the love and attention that it deserves. I mean, you got Trayvon Walker on the one side, who's young and early in his career, and then Josh Allen, now Josh Allen Hines, I believe it is, or Hines Allen, whatever, however he changed it. I guess he was tired of everyone saying Josh Allen, and they thought of the Josh Allen who's the quarterback of the Buffalo Bills. But that group's obviously super talented, and I got to imagine they're licking their chops a little bit going into this week, seeing how sort of discombobulated the Browns' offensive line was in week one, and feeling like they have some real opportunities to get after the quarterback and make some plays this weekend.
Yeah, no, I feel like they probably are welcoming the challenge to take on a Browns offensive line that's still trying to figure it out. Josh Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker last year combined for 27.5 sacks. You saw them have dominant splash plays against the Miami Dolphins. Trayvon Walker in particular had 2 sacks. They're joined by Eric Armstead, another big physical player on the interior. And so Ryan Nielsen, new defense coordinator, wants to keep it simple for his guys. He wants them to play fast. So they're not going to do a lot of complicated stuff. They're going to try and beat people man on man. They're going to try and win up front. They're going to play a variety of man coverage in the back end, see if they can cover them up. And then they're hoping over time, the relentlessness of the D-line wears the opponent down. They're able to knock the quarterback around a little bit.
What's the thing that stands out to you about the Browns that you, aside from maybe the obvious of, well, Myles Garrett's a freak and he could obviously wreck a game plan. We know that the Jaguars are going to be circling him. What's the thing that you think is maybe your biggest concern about this Browns team on offense or defense going into week 2 that the Jaguars could have some issues with?
The overall physicality of the team. I think when this team has been backed into a corner, they can go to the next level. Fortunately for the Jaguars, the game is on at home. It's not in the dog pound because they play with a different energy when they're in front of the home fans. But matching and exceeding the physicality that the Browns are going to do. You have to understand, Doug Peterson is very familiar with Jim Schwartz. They were on the same coaching staff in Philadelphia. Schwartz helped him win a Super Bowl as the defense coordinator, but they're not together now. So is there some kind of rivalry or acrimony that goes with those guys when they square off? And so I'm sure, knowing Coach Schwartz, that he's going to have the defense frothy and ready to go. And so this is going to be, a backyard brawl. This is going to be a physical game, and the team that is able to impose their will early will have an opportunity to run away with it late.
In relation to Trevor Lawrence, I still am of the belief that he has a chance to be one of the very best quarterbacks in this league, a top 10 guy. But I think, his first couple of years here, people have kind of been left with some questions still about what he brings to the table, how good he really is, if he can get to that level. Just what are fans like? What's the conversation around him this year from the fan base, from people who cover the team, people around the team like yourself, in terms of what you need to see from him this year for him to kind of take that next step?
I think high level of consistency. Much like Deshaun Watson is criticized because his performance doesn't match the compensation. When Trevor Lawrence signed that big deal, everyone expects him to play to the level of the compensation. And regardless of what the market may bear, when you're paid the kind of money that he's paid, people expect him to take his game to another level. And so in watching Trevor, even in week 1, it's about making those big time throws, those hero throws when you need it. But it's also about operating efficiently as a pocket passer. When he does that, this offense can roll. I would say the pieces of the puzzle fit together well on the perimeter in terms of the receivers. So Trevor Lawrence just has to hit the ball, just has to hit the open man. If he does that, this offense moves. But yeah, there's a lot of pressure on Trevor. Not quite the same intensity that is on Deshaun Watson. But yeah, there's pressure on him as the number 1 overall pick. There's a level of play that you want to see those guys get to. He's yet to get there, even though he's working like crazy, trying to make himself a better player each and every day.
Bucky, I'll get you out of here with this, man. And we're very thankful for your time joining us on the Dog Check this week. The Jaguars will win on Sunday, fill in the blank, if
Trevor Lawrence brings his A game. Trevor Lawrence played really well against the Miami Dolphins. There's a throw, if anyone watches the touchdown that he threw to Brian Thomas Jr., if you get a chance to see the end zone copy, really he lets it go. He layers it. I would say it's almost like going to the state fair when they're having you throw the ball into the basket off the backboard, where you have to have the ability to layer it and touch it and drop it into the basket. That's what he was able to do. And those are the kind of throws that you want to see from him, but he has to do it consistently. And if he can be the consistent player that has shown up in the flashes, then the Jaguars have a chance. But look, it's going to be tough because that front is going to disrupt the timing of the passing game. And so he's going to have to show all of the talent, but most importantly, the toughness. Can he handle the relentless pressure that the Browns are going to bring? Can he handle it and continue to deliver consistent balls to his playmakers? Because if he does, then the Jaguars have an opportunity to walk out the stadium with a dub.
This episode was awesome. It had a little bit of everything. It had lots of basketball references. It had a great preview of Browns Jaguars, some Deshaun Watson talk, some Trevor Lawrence talk. If you're a Jaguars fan, if you're a Browns fan, if you're a basketball fan, this is the show for you. So no, Bucky, truly can't thank you enough for the time this week, man. Again, and if you don't know Bucky at this point, you should, because he's everywhere. He's obviously the host of Bleav in Jaguars, does work for the NFL Network, a broadcasting analyst for the Jaguars, and a former player himself. So we obviously appreciate your insight, man. Thanks for the time. I hope we get a chance to reconnect down the line here.
And look, we should be able to do it. So next time we come on, I know I'm going to have a LeBron reference. I should bring some baby powder so I can throw it straight up in the air.
I like that. You will definitely appease the people of Cleveland if you do something like that, because in this town, LeBron is still king. So appreciate that, my man. Thanks again for the time. Appreciate you guys as well for tuning in and watching and listening. As always, we are part of the Bleav Network of podcasts and, of course, airing weekly on Bally Sports Cleveland. Until next time, thanks for watching, and as always, go Browns.